Pluto is about to station direct. On Thursday at 4:39 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. And this is significant because within 2 hours time from that, Mercury is going to ingress Scorpio. And Mercury will also have his retrograde period back through the degrees of Scorpio, meaning that this is a poignant time to be doing this archetypal work on themes that relate to Scorpionic energy. When we look at Mercury, he relates to being the messenger and the communicator. And being in Scorpio, Pluto's rulership, we are looking at themes to do with rebirth and what's buried. So I personally like to think of this time as turning my perception and my awareness to the parts of myself that have been buried, forgotten, or disguised, and to evoke a resurrection and a rebirth of these parts of myself that have been left behind. I want to share with you a myth that demonstrates this very well and how it's a cyclical theme going back to soul to retrieve these parts of self. And really what this myth offers us is the awareness that we need to cyclically dive deep into our own nourishing waters where we can allow for a mini death, that being the death of the ego, so that we can go into our feelings and our emotions. And it's in that realm when we sit there with those emotions and feelings that we start to reclaim and extract our unique gifts of soul. And as we come back up in that rebirth, we bring them back out into the daily world. This myth reminds us that when we don't dive in and go into our feelings and emotions, that we can become brittle and start fading away. We have to dive into those waters, and the astrology tells us that this is a timely message. Really, this myth is for anyone that has been extending themselves out into the world, striving, accomplishing, or even just being mama and being on with everyone else's needs. It's a time about where all of that no longer feels satisfying. We know that we have to answer the call and dive into our own nourishing waters. A long, long time ago, there was a land so white it was known as the Great White Land. And it was known as the name of Analuk, which means the old grandmother. And here, the land was so white and the sky was so white that if anything moved, you couldn't even see it. And if you did catch it out of the corner of your eye, it just looked like a little black dot on the horizon, moving erratically. And all the people that lived in this land, this great white land, were known to live in the hair of the old grandmother. And here was a man who was very, very lonely. And he was so lonely that he had wept so much for such a long, long time. And he had wept creases in his face from his eyes right down his cheeks, deep, deep crevices from his loneliness. And one day he was out on his kayak hunting for fish, and he didn't have a good day, so he stayed out a little longer than usual. And as the sun set and the night fell, he noticed a glowing light over in the distance, so he paddled on over in his kayak. And as he got closer and closer, he could start to see 12 beautiful women dancing underneath the starlight. And he was amazed. And so he slowly paddled closer and closer to the women. And he could see that there were 12 seal skins stacked up on the rock that belonged to the women. They had shed their seal skin to take on human form, to dance naked under the starlight. And he watched with his mouth agape in awe of this sight. And so he got closer and closer to the rock, and all of a sudden, he doesn't know what came over him, but he jumped up on that rock and he grabbed one of the seal skins and he stuffed it into his parka, and he waited. And one by one, each of the beautiful women that were very long and slender, and they had long arms and long fingers and long toes, long legs, and long silky black hair, one by one they dove back into the sea, putting on their sealskin and diving back in. And when the last woman was left looking for her sealskin, he jumped out and he said, "Woman, be my wife." And she said, oh, I can't, I'm from beneath. And he said, "Woman, I am a lonely man, please be my wife." And she says, "But you're from above and I'm from beneath." He says, "Woman, I promise you, in 7 years, I will return you to your home place, if that is what you wish. But please, I beg of you, come with me, be my wife for 7 years." And so she went with him. She went to the land above. And things went well for quite some time. They lived together and they had a little boy together. The little boy's name was Oruk. And things were going quite well until one day when they weren't. And the sealskin woman noticed that her vision was diminishing. She had to start putting her arms out in front of her because she was walking into things. She was walking into the corners of the seal house, and she started to develop a limp. She touched her eyelids and her eyelids were dry and peeling, and her skin was becoming cracked and brittle. And more and more her vision was declining, and this disturbed her, for she was once a beautiful young thing and now she was becoming very old, frail and withered. She knew it was time. And one night the boy lay in his bed hearing his parents argue, and he could hear his mother saying, "Give me back my soul skin. You promised 7 years and you would give it back." And the father said, "Never." "Why? So you can abandon us? Leave me and the boy? What would we do?" And with that, the father stormed out of the house, slamming the door. And little Uruk could hear his mother crying. And he tossed and he turned in his bed and went one side of the pillow for a while and rolled over to the other side and tried to go to sleep. And after some time, he couldn't tell if it was a dream or if he imagined it, but he heard this sound on a brewing storm outside that sounded like his name. Boy sat up in his bed and he pulled on his clothes and he grabbed his mamelukes, his moccasins, and he put them on and he ran over to the window and opened the window and he looked out and he could see all the northern lights above. And at first it looked like a witch, and then it looked like a bear, and then a dog, and then the northern lights looked like someone was shaking out a blanket. And then he heard it again. See out there on a rock far out at sea, a big old seal with a white mustache that come all the way down to its belly, and it had the whitest of white hair on its head, and rich, yellow, soulful eyes. And so Uruk jumped out the window and he started running down the hill, all the while hearing his name on the storm that was brewing. Uruk! And as he ran and he ran, he tripped over a bundle and he thought it was a rock, but it wasn't. And he stopped to pick it up and he shook it out and he held it up and then he held it to his face. And it was his mother's sealskin. He could smell her soul, and he inhaled. And he knew it was his mother because he could smell her, and the scent enlivened every nerve in his body. And he picked it up again and he put it to his face and he inhaled deeply. And he knew he had to return this to his mother because it was her soul skin, seal skin. And he ran back up the hill and ran in the door of the skin house and fell into his mother's arms. And she held them both. And in that moment, she didn't know which she loved more, her son or her seal skin. And she quickly took the sealskin and she put it on and patted it onto her body and patted it up the front. And she grabbed everything that she owned, which wasn't much at all, and she went to run out the door. And then she heard Uruk say, Mother, wait, where are you going without me? And she stopped. She turned to look at the boy. She loved this boy dearly, but she was being called. She looked at him and then she grabbed him like a blubber bundle and stuffed him under her arm, and then she ran out the door, and the northern lights are swirling and the storm is brewing, and she's running, and all the while you can hear the old seal on the rock out at sea calling, Uruk, Uruk. And she goes running, tumbling down the hill over the edge of the cliff and right down onto the beach, and she drags herself along the shore and plunges into the sea. And Uruk says, Mother, wait, I can't swim. And she turns to the boy and she looks at him and she takes his face in her hands. And she takes a deep breath in. And she puts her lips to his lips and she breathes her breath into him. And they dive into the water, swimming out to the old seal on the rock far out at sea. And together they all plunge in and they go down, right to the depth of the bottom of the ocean. And here the little boy can breathe because he has his mother's breath in him. And the old seal is the grandfather of Uruk. He says to his daughter, the seal woman, is this my grandson? And she says, yes, it is. And he is so proud. His voice almost shakes when he says, my grandson. And together they stay. She says to the grandfather, you know he cannot stay. And he says, I know, but we will have some time together first. And so for 7 days and 7 nights they stay under the sea, and she's reunited with her sisters and they are dancing and rejoicing and celebrating and playing with all the other seals at the bottom of the sea for 7 days and 7 nights. And then the seal woman says to her father, it's not his time, he has to go back. And he says, I know. So they take Uruk, one of them either side, holding his hands, and very slowly they go up, and they go up, and up, and up, all the way up to break the surface of the ocean. And very slowly they swim back to shore, placing a rook on the rocks. And he says, "You're going to leave me, aren't you?" And his mother says to him, "I have given you everything. A visit to the home place. I leave you my knife and my fire sticks. And you have my breath inside of you, which will make you a great storyteller and a great speaker of words." And with that, the mother and the grandfather seal very slowly swam back out to sea. And they were waving and waving. And a rook sat on the shore, waving back, tears streaming down. And they waved back, and a rook waved back. And this went on for some time, a very slow dance of waving and waving to each other underneath the great white sky. And eventually, the seal woman and her father slipped back under the surface of the sea, going back to the home place. And the boy had a magical touch. He would come to the ocean and call to the fish, and they would throw themselves in his net. He was known as a great storyteller, a singer of songs, a wordsmith, and a great healer. The people referred to him as the shaman, not only because he was the drummer of drums, but because he could also be seen far out at sea on a rock talking to what appeared to be a female seal, known as the Shiny One. And many, many hunters tried to capture her and kill her, but they couldn't. And until this day, it is said that a rook has never told the source of his magic.